Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the first video of Python Made Simpler series. In this video, we will be learning what data types are, and then we will be going over some other objectives. Let me show you what kind of things we will be covering in this video. So the first thing we will be going over in this video will be what data types are, and then we will learn about different types of data types. Then we will learn how to assign them to variables. Then we will discuss some conventions that we need to keep in mind when we are defining variables in Python. And then finally, we will be going over print and type function. As you guys can see that there's a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. So the first question that I want to ask you guys is, when you hear about data types, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? When I heard about data types, I was a bit confused. It wasn't until that I gave a pause between data and types that things started to make sense. A very simple definition of data types is types of data. And we know from experience that data can be of different types. It can be in the form of strings, numbers, decimals. It can be either true and false or binary. Similarly, in Python, data types have the same meaning. All they define is basically types of data. In this video, we will be covering most common types that you will be dealing with on daily basis. So in the first slide, you can see that we have three categories. The first one is numeric, then text and Boolean. Numeric itself has three types of data types. The first one is going to be integers. They're exactly the same the way we studied them in mathematics. These are whole numbers which include positive and negative side of number line. And if you add a decimal, then it will automatically be converted into float. The reason why I wrote 1 here and then 1.0 here, just to kind of show you that as soon as you add a decimal in front of an integer, it automatically converts into a float type. In Python or in any other programming language, we call decimals floats. And you can see here from data types that if it doesn't have any decimal, then these are going to be integers, and if they have decimals, then they will be float. And then the third type is complex numbers. Personally, I haven't dealt with complex numbers a lot in my programming journey, but if you're doing some complicated mathematical stuff, definitely you will be coming across complex numbers. I just wanted you to be aware that yes, in programming language, specifically Python, we do have complex numbers. And the way in mathematics you normally write a real part and imaginary part, it's the same thing. But in mathematics, normally for imaginary part, we use an I, but in programming, we use a J. All right, so just keep that in mind. If you type an I instead of a J, you will get an error. Then the second category is text. Text is something that you send to another person on daily basis. And as you can type anything in that particular message, similarly in Python as well, or in any other programming language, you can type anything in string. So in programming language, how you define a string is basically by using a set of quotes. As you guys can see here that my string here starts with a quote and it ends with a quote. In anything that's going to be inside it, it's going to be a string. And as you guys can see that you can type literally anything. We do have integers and floats as well, but because they're instead of quotes, these are strings. If they're without set of quotes, then they will be either integers or floats, depending upon whether you have used a decimal or no. But here, because they're inside a set of quotes, then they will be treated as a string. And here I just wanted to differentiate that you guys can see that I've written 2.3 twice, but once with one quote and then the other time it's with double quotes. It doesn't make a difference. In Python, you can define strings either way. You can either use a single set of quote or double set of quote. Both will be considered strings. And then at last, we have a Boolean, which is basically true, but because it's in set of quotes, then it will be treated as a string. Now, the third category, as I just mentioned, is Boolean. Boolean, in very simple terms, is true and false. And as you guys can notice that I've written true and false with a capital T and an F. So that's how Python will identify them as a Boolean. If you use a lowercase t or a lowercase f, then Python won't treat them as Boolean and you will get an error. So just keep that in mind. That if you're going to define Booleans, then to use a capital T and a capital F, and both true and false belong to the Boolean data type. And Boolean data type doesn't consist of anything else. Let's jump to the text editor to see some examples. Just a quick note that for this series, I will be using VS Code as my text editor. I will try to make a video to show you guys some key components of VS Code and why I love it so much. But again, as a programmer, you have a lot of choices that are going to be there. I did make a separate video on the differences between an IDE and a text editor. And in that video, I also discussed different types of text editors as well as IDEs that you have that you can start your programming journey with. Do check that video out. You guys can see here that I have three types of data types written down. The first one is integer, then float and complex. First thing to notice that these are a bit faded out, which basically means that these are comments. In Python, you add comments by using a hash. Anything that is going to be commented, Python is just simply going to ignore it while executing the code, and it will execute everything else. Which means that Python will ignore this integer, and it will execute all of this, all of this, and all of this. And all the comments will be just simply ignored. Comments are mainly used for us humans just to kind of know what exactly is going on in code. Because as you guys know that if you share your code with someone else, because it's going to be so technical, they will spend a lot of time just understanding what you wrote. Comments just help them identify what exactly the code is doing so that they can either contribute in it or can use that particular thing in their program. So a good practice is wherever your variables or your code is not able to explain itself, that's where you use comments so that other person doesn't have to spend a lot of time decoding what you wrote. It will help them save a lot of time. Now, the first thing that we have done here is basically declared a variable. So variables are mainly declared by writing anything that you want. Variable can literally have any name, and then you use an equal to sign and then the value. And that value is basically a data type. You can notice that here it's an integer, here it's a float, and here it's a complex number. A few conventions that you need to keep in mind while defining variables. The first one will be that when you're defining a variable, you cannot use a special character in its name, which means that you cannot use an exclamation mark, a hash, a dollar sign, or any of the special characters. There's only one special character that you can use while defining variables, and those are underscores. Because you cannot assign space between variable names, that's where your underscore comes in just to kind of space out. That's where you will be using underscore most of the times. So let's say if I want to say integer 1, I can do that. And you can see that underscore just acts as a space between integer and 1. Another thing is that you can definitely use numbers while defining your variable names, but you cannot start your variable names with numbers. Similarly, we know that you cannot use special characters in variable names, which automatically means that you cannot even start variable names with special characters. Let me show you an example. So here we used an underscore and we didn't get any error. Let's try to use an exclamation mark. And you will see that now Python starts complaining that, hey man, whatever you wrote, I'm not able to understand, please change it. Which basically tells us that we cannot use special characters. Now let's say I want to start my variable name with a number. Let's try to do that. And you will see that Python again complains. So you cannot use numbers as well. By convention, we use lowercase letters in variable names, the way I've done here. So just try to stick to that convention. Anything else, you're free to use it. You're free to use uppercase letters, not an issue. But it's just that in Python community, we normally define variables with lowercase letters. And if you want to add some space between variable names, you can always use an underscore the way I told you, integer type. You can always do that and it's a valid variable name. And you can type any variable name you want. These are some of the conventions that you guys need to keep in mind when you're actually defining variable names. A very important thing that I forgot was, I forgot to tell you what exactly variables mean. So think of variables as a container where you're actually storing your data. Okay, if you want a more technical definition, variables are the names of memory location where your data is going to be stored. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have a cookie and you don't want to eat the cookie right away. You want to eat it after 2-3 hours. Similarly, let's say we have a data type 1 and we don't want to use it right now in our code. We want to use it later. So what we can do is basically we can just simply store that cookie inside a cookie container and then we can just simply eat it after 2-3 hours, right? Similarly, in programming, you can store 1 inside a variable, and then after that, whenever you want to use 1, you can just simply call an integer and you will have the value of 1. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's comment this out first, and let's comment this as well, and let's go ahead and print it. Just keep in mind here that I'm not printing 1, I'm printing an integer. How you print something in Python is by using a print function and then putting that thing inside the parentheses of print, and it will be printed inside the console. Let me show you. You will see that 1 is printed here. Now, a few things that we need to notice is first that I haven't used 1. Basically, I wasn't printing 1, I was printing integer. And as we learned that integer is the name of memory location where 1 is stored, that means whenever now I will call integer, it will automatically give us the value for 1. Similarly, if I write print 1, clear the console, print this, you will see that both gives us the same thing. So basically printing integer is the same as printing 1 because integer has the value of 1. So that's how you define a variable in Python, and that's how you actually print that thing inside your terminal by using a print function. And then the third thing that we need to learn is basically how to exactly know that the type of variable we are dealing with, in reality, it is an integer. And we do that by using a type function. So by using a type function, we actually get the type of data that we are dealing with. I told you that 1 here is basically an integer. That means when we go ahead and actually try to print the type of whatever this variable is, we should get an integer. So let's go ahead and try that. You will see that it belongs to the class int. And int basically here is an abbreviation for integer. So this is how we get the type of data type we are dealing with. Just to kind of recap what we learned, because in past few minutes we covered a lot of things. How we define a variable is by using any name that we want and then just simply using an equal to and then using the data type. Okay, now basically that means that that particular name, in our case integer, will have the value of 1. So whenever now you want to use the value of 1, you can just simply call integer and it will give you that value. Then how we print things in Python is by using a print function and just simply putting that thing that we want to print inside the parentheses. And how we get the type of data type is by using a type. So as you guys can see that first we want to print this thing inside a console. That's why we used print. Then we want to get the type of that particular data type. That's why we use type inside of print so that we can print that. And because we want to get the data type of integer, which is our variable name, we have to do that. Now another really important thing, let's say we just simply had integer. You will see that Python basically goes ahead and gives us these yellow lines, which basically means that Python is not able to recognize integer because we never defined it. Our variable name is integer. So that means now if we have to print this, we just need to copy this and we need to type it here. And you will see here now Python doesn't complain anymore because we have defined integer and it can find integer as a variable name. That's why it can print it. If we have integer here, then similarly we have to put integer. First, let's go ahead and just print this. And you will see that Python gives us an error, which is a name error, right? It basically says that it's not defined. And it's right, that we haven't defined integer, we have defined integer. So all we need to do is we just need to copy this, paste it here, and you will see that Python doesn't complain anymore. And we can just go ahead and print it, and you will see the answer. So this was our first data type, which were integers. So let's just comment this out. Now everything will be really quick. So let's go ahead and learn about floats. Now you can see that here we had an integer that was 1. And as soon as I added a decimal in front of it, it automatically got converted into float. Let me show you. And you can see that it belongs to the float class and it's 1.0. If I remove the decimal and then print it, you will see now it's an int class. So as soon as you add a decimal in front of an integer, it automatically gets converted into float. So this was our float type. And then the third numeric type is going to be complex. And like I told you guys that you have to use a J in the imaginary part, you cannot use an I. First, let's go ahead and print this. You will see that it belongs to the complex type. Now let's say instead of a J, I had an I, the way we normally write it in mathematics. And we go ahead and print this. You will see that it gives us an error. It's a syntax error. For now, you guys don't have to worry about what syntax error means. Think of syntax error that whatever we wrote, Python is not able to understand that. I will make a future video in which I will talk about different types of error that as a beginner you can come across and how to go about debugging them. Python has a really intuitive way of showing you where the error exactly is. As you guys can see here that the error is in line 12 and our line 12 is where we define the complex number. And if we change it to J, Python doesn't complain anymore and we can go ahead and print this. So this was our complex data type. Now let me just delete all this so that we can focus on other data types. Now the data type that we're going to talk about are strings. Let me just uncomment this. And now you can see here that similar to the example that we talked about in the slides, we have different types of strings. And as you guys can notice here that I've used numbers in my variable name and Python doesn't complain. But if I start my variable name with a number, Python will complain. So just keep that in mind. Strings can be defined by using a single set of quotes or double set of quotes. Let me just change this to double sets just to kind of show you guys. And it doesn't make a difference. Either way, Python will treat it as a string. Anything that you write after the second quote won't be considered a string, and Python will just simply ignore it. So let's say if you write world, you will see that it doesn't turn green and Python complains about it. So keep that in mind, that your string starts with a quote and it ends on a quote. And it doesn't matter whatever you guys write inside it, whether it's a number, whether it's a Boolean, whether it's a sentence, it's considered a string. Let me show you. So let's say we have one here, right? And it's in set of quotes. Few examples back, we saw when we print the type of 1, we get an integer. So let's go ahead and print the type of string 2 and see what we get. So let's change this and let's change it here. Now, as you guys can see that I want to print string 2, that's why I printed the variable name string 2. If I wanted to print, let's say string 3, I would have just simply written string 3. And I would have gotten string 3. Because string 3 is the variable name, which basically is the name of memory location where 2.4 is stored. Okay, so let's delete this and go back to 2 and print this. And you will see that we get string. Even though we printed 1, but we get string. And you can print anything that you want either way. You can use a variable name or you can use that particular thing directly. The way I used hello world here, it doesn't matter. Either way, you will get a string because in the end variables takes up the value of whatever data type you assigned it to. In this case, we assigned a variable string 2 as 1. So we got that. If we would have printed string 3, we would have gotten 2.4. And again, it would have belonged to the string class because it's in the set of quotes. So these are strings. In future videos, we will dig a bit more deeper and we will talk a bit more about strings and what other types of things you can do with them. A very important thing to note is that in Python, every single thing is an object, which means that you can interact with every single thing that you define. Every single thing will have its own properties and every single thing will have its own functions. That's why, like in future videos, we will discuss more about what kind of functions you guys can use and what exactly functions are. Don't worry about those things right now. I'll just focus on learning what different types of data types we have in Python. And in future videos, I will help you understand each and everything. And now the last data type for this video will be Boolean. We will discuss other data types in another video because I feel that this video is going a bit longer than what I expected it to be. So let's just talk about Boolean, and then in the next video, we will talk about other data types, which are sequential data types. So Boolean, as I told you guys, is nothing more than true and false. And as you guys can see here that in my variable name, I've used an underscore just to kind of give some space between is true, and I've assigned it true. So if I go ahead and print this, you will see that we get the class bool, which is Boolean. And instead of true, you can also call false. Let's go ahead and print this. And we will see that now we get false. And again, it's a Boolean type. And if we just simply add set of quotes here, and if we go ahead and print this, you will see that we get the class type string. So these are some really common data types that you will be dealing with. Like I said that in this video, I didn't cover all the data types that there are in Python because the video was going a bit longer than what I expected it to be. In next video, we will go through sequential data types and we will learn what exactly they are. I hope this video gave you a good understanding of what data types are, how you define variables, how you use print and type function, and it gave you a good understanding of how you actually differentiate between different data types. That basically just by adding a set of quotes, you can simply turn an integer, a float into a string data type. There are some other special functions for that purpose too. We will talk about them in future videos. I just wanted to keep this video as basic as I could, because I know when you start your programming journey, it's really easy to get overwhelmed. So we will progress step by step in this series. If you guys really like the video, do hit the like and subscribe button. Thanks for watching.